What's going on, YouTubers, gamers and hobbyists, and welcome to this episode of Board Games, in which I'm looking at this particular board game, The Mysteries of Old Peking. As you can see, it's quite a large boxed board game. When it's old school, it's like games of old. See, these days you'd get a game like this and it'd be kind of almost half size when the board would be folded up again, or like jigsaw puzzled into the box. As you can see, it's by MB Games, and it's for ages 8 and up, for between 2 and 6 players. We'll come on to the 2 to 6 players bit in a moment. The Chinese detective game. Now this is basically, to cut a long story short, Cluedo set in Peking. So it's China, or Chinese version Cluedo. Just look on the back here. Use skill, logic and luck to solve the mysteries. You've got up to 50 mysteries to solve, and that's what it's kind of like. So let's take a look inside. It's an old game. I've had it for years, but as you can see, it's in fairly good condition. So I'll just pop the lid to one side. This is the board. This is how board games used to come. Let's just move my camera out of the way so that you can see what's going on. I'll pop this to one side here. There we go. There. So this is the board opening out. And as you can see, it's still great quality, you know. The glossy. They really made things better in the old days, I think. And as you can see, it's like Cluedo, in Cluedo you've got like a mansion with rooms to go to, and this is like across Peking, going to places. A little bit like 221B Baker Street with the old Sherlock Holmes version, which is like Cluedo set in London. But this is it here. So you get like cards, and what it's got. And here's your characters. Like, this is Mr. Looksy. I don't know. Yeah, Mr. Looksy. They got like funny sounding names. You've got Mr. Catchim. And instead of being like coloured bits of plastic, this is like what they used. Mr. Smarty. So they're all the same character, like looking, but just different colours, really. Let's pop these cards here. Got Mr. What's Up. Like so. Mr. Quick. And you've got Mr. Clue. But yeah. So I'm just putting some of these cards together as I get them out here. Now on the back of some of the cards, you get like clues and things. And there's a really cool, I don't know, I can't remember how this works. But it's like a mirror. I can't remember how this works. But basically what you do is, this is like a thing which tells you the clue, and you can't see what it says until you use this. I think some of them are kind of mirrored, and you can only see it through the red and that, and it does work really well. There's another thing here as well which kind of filters out certain letters here. I can't for the life of me remember how it goes. That actually says spy in reverse. But yeah, this is all about finding out the answer, and this is quite important in the game. It's been years since I've played it, So forgive me for not knowing. But these are the cards. I forget what these are for as well. I do forget, but they're there. So you've got your dice. I believe this was this is like a clue sheet that I printed out. So here's a way of doing it. So I forget what this is used for as well, but it's all to do with finding out. Right. So this is for the missions. That's to reveal the answers. So here's your casebook with your 50 mysteries in or whatever. Your clue sheets. 2 pencils. Instructions. So we've got culprit cards here, and I don't know what this is all about. It's been so long since I played it. But yeah, 10s. So the names are quite cool. So you got Who Me, Dun Wong, Slyly, Sing Song, Wee One, Seesaw, Handy, Achu, Teehee, Fooding, So Long, Scheming. So they're kind of funny names. I'm just going to pop my phone on silent so we don't get interrupted. And yeah, so I've got more cards down here. My intention with this game is to break it out. So it's got instructions on the back of some of these cards. Visit the wise man, go straight to the temple. Fortune cookie cards. See, I can remember this. I remember enjoying this game more than I did Cluedo. Cluedo was a bit too basic. It was like, meh. It's just a process of elimination. This was slightly more to this. So I think this must be the original dice. It's a wooden dice, which they used to use in games gone by. So yeah, great to still have this game. We'll look at NB Games though, if I haven't done so already. And but yeah, it's fun because you got the characters here. Like I say, it's not like Cluedo where you have just little counters. No, these days you'd have actual miniatures, wouldn't you? Because that's the way games seem to be going. But you know, these are quite adequate. You know, for a board game, I think it's quite cool. So I'm kind of renovating this game, digging it out, looking it up and seeing how it goes, and yeah. So this is what we're going to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to delve into the history behind NB Games for a moment here. So a bit of further information then we got. So Milton Bradley is what NB Games is. That's what the MB stands for in NB Games, Milton Bradley. Okay, I'm reading this from a bit of their history. It says Milton Bradley found success making board games. Well, yeah. In 1860, Milton Bradley moved to Springfield, Massachusetts, and set up the state's first color lithography shop. Its graphic design of Abraham Lincoln sold very well until Lincoln grew his beard and rendered the likeness out of date. Struggling to find a new way to use his lithography machine, Bradley visited his friend George Tapley. Tapley challenged him to a game, most likely an Old English game. Bradley conceived the idea of making a purely American game. He created the checkered game of life, which had players moving along a track from infancy to happy old age, in which the point was to avoid ruin and reach happy old age. Squares were labelled with moral positions from honour and bravery to disgrace and ruin. players used a spinner instead of dice because of the negative association with gambling. So that's quite interesting. By spring of 1861, over 45,000 copies of the checkered game of life had been sold. Bradley became convinced board games were his company's future. Well, I should say so. When the Civil War broke out in early 1861, Milton Bradley temporarily gave up making board games and tried to make new weaponry. However, upon seeing bored soldiers stationed in Springfield, Bradley began producing small games the soldiers could play during their own time. These are regarded as the first travel games in the country. These games included chess, checkers, backgammon, dominoes, and the checkered game of life. They were sold for $1 apiece to soldiers and charitable organisations that bought them in bulk to distribute. By the 1870s, the company was producing dozens of games and capitalising on fads. Milton Bradley became the first manufacturer in America to make croquet sets. The sets included wickets, mallets, balls, stakes, and an authoritative set of rules to play by that Bradley himself had created from oral tradition and his own sense of fair play. In 1880, the company began making jigsaws. In the late 1860s, Bradley became involved in the kindergarten movement. Deeply invested in the cause, his company began manufacturing educational items such as coloured papers and paints. The company was hurt by Bradley's generosity. He gave these materials away free of charge, which cost them. Due to the recession of the late 1870s, his investors told him either his kindergarten work must go or they would go. Bradley chose to keep his kindergarten work. His friend George Tapley bought the interest of the lost investors and took over as president of the Milton Bradley Company. The Milton Bradley Company took a new direction in 1869 after Milton Bradley went to hear a lecture about the kindergarten movement by early education pioneer Elizabeth Peabody. Peabody promoted the philosophy of the German scholar Friedrich Froebel. Froebel stated that through education, children learn and develop through creative activities. Bradley would spend much of the rest of his life promoting the kindergarten movement, both personally and through the Milton Bradley Company. Milton Bradley was an early advocate of Friedrich Froebel's idea of kindergarten. Springfield's first kindergarten students were Milton Bradley's two daughters, and the first teachers in Springfield were Milton, his wife, and his father. Milton Bradley's company's involvement with kindergarten began with the production of gifts, the term used by Froebel for the geometric wooden playthings that he felt were necessary to properly structure children's creative development. Bradley spent months devising the exact shades in which to produce these materials. His final choice of 6 pigments of red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and violet would remain the standard colours for children's art supplies throughout the 20th century. The company's educational supplies turned out to be a large portion of their income at the turn of the century. They produced supplies any grade school teacher could use, such as toy money, multiplication sticks, and movable clock dials. Milton Bradley continued producing games, particularly parlour games played by adults. They produced Visit to the Gypsies, Word Gardening, Happy Days in Old New England, and fortune telling. They also created jigsaw puzzles of wrecked vehicles, which were popular among young boys. When Milton Bradley died in 1911, the company was passed to Robert Ellis, who passed it to Bradley's son-in-law, Robert Ingersoll, who eventually passed it to George Tapley's son, William, in 1920. Bradley bought out McLaughlin Brothers, which went out of business after John McLaughlin's death. Milton Bradley began to decline in the 1920s and fell dramatically in the 1930s during the Depression. Fewer people were spending money on board games. The company kept losing money until 1940, when they sunk too low and the banks demanded payment on loans. Desperate to avoid bankruptcy, the board of directors persuaded James J. Shea, a Springfield businessman, to take over presidency of the company. Shea immediately moved to decrease the company's debt. He began a major renovation of the Milton Bradley plant by burning old inventory that had been accumulating since the turn of the century. With the outbreak of World War II, Milton Bradley started producing a universal joint created by Shea, used on the landing gear of fighter planes. They also reproduced a revised version of their game kits for soldiers, which earned the company $2 million. Milton Bradley did not stop creating board games, although they did cut their line from 410 titles to 150. New games were introduced during this time, such as Patriotic Game of the States, Chutes and Ladders, and Candyland. The advent of the television could have threatened the industry, but Shea used it to his advantage. Various companies acquired licenses to television shows, the purpose of producing all manner of promotional items, including games. In 1959, Milton Bradley released Concentration, a memory game based on the NBC television show of the same name. The game was such a success that editions were issued annually into 1982, long after the show was cancelled in 1973. Similar practices were used for box game adaptations of the game shows Password and Jeopardy! Milton Bradley celebrated their centennial in 1960 with the re-release of the Checkered Game of Life, which was modernised. It was now simply called the Game of Life, and the goal was no longer to reach happy old age and to become a millionaire. Twister made its debut in the 1960s as well, thanks to Johnny Carson's suggestive comments as Eva Garber played the game on his show. Twister became a phenomenon. In the 1960s, Milton Bradley Games were licensed in Australia by John Sands Pty Limited. In 1967, James Shea Jr. took over as president of Milton Bradley, becoming CEO in 1968, succeeding his father. During his presidency, Milton Bradley bought Playschool MFG.co. the ES-Low company, makers of Yahtzee and Body Language. During the 1970s and 1980s, electronic games became popular. Milton Bradley released Simon in 1978, which was fairly late in the movement. By 1980, it was their best-selling item. In 1979, Milton Bradley also developed the first handheld cartridge-based console, the Microvision. In 1983, seeing the potential of the new Vectrex vector-based video game console, the company purchased General Consumer Electronics, GCE. Both the Vectrex and Microvision were designed by J. Smith. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Milton Bradley marketed a series of games such as Hero Quest and Battle Masters in North America that were developed in the United Kingdom by Games Workshop. That drew heavily from GW's Warhammer Fantasy Universe, albeit without explicit reference to the Warhammer product line. Milton Bradley was sued by two men, Alan Coleman and Roger Burton, who claimed to have presented the original concept for Dark Tower to Milton Bradley in the late 1970s, at which point MB declined to pursue it, but thereafter independently developed the game. One of the Dark Tower game designers claims the court's decision was unfair. In 1984, Hasbro, ending 124 years of family ownership, bought out Milton Bradley. Wholly owned by Hasbro, Milton Bradley continued to turn out games that capitalised on current trends. The 1990s saw the release of Gator Golf, Crack the Case, Mall Madness, and 1313 Dead End Drive. In 1991, Hasbro acquired Milton Bradley's former arch-rival Parker Brothers. In 1998, Milton Bradley merged with Parker Brothers to form Hasbro Games. After the consolidation, Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers turned into brands of Hasbro before being both dropped in 2009 in favour of the parent company's name. Now, that's an awful lot of history to take in such a short space of time, but I think it's important. Once they're out there, and further games that are produced by Milton Bradley, for instance, we can then skip over the history part. But there it is. That's a bit of the history. So let's get back to the actual board game itself. All right. So having had a little playthrough just to see, get my memory back in, I've now worked out what you're going to do. So basically, the characters start in the centre here. So whether there's 2 or up to 6 of you. These are your culprits who you have to eliminate from. And you go to the various places and they'll give you information such as, the culprit had a moustache, for instance. So then you can on your clue sheet, you can eliminate all the numbers that didn't have the moustache or write the clues down. And the secret things from before was like you put the witness there. The witnesses have this, so you can't see anything there. And then I don't know if you could see that on camera. You place that over it and you can read it, but you can't without it. So it's just a little bit of extra secrecy. The wise man uses the mirror. So that's kind of the message you see there. Then when you put the mirror up, you can read the message in the mirror, and yeah. And then of course the great one is the spy, because you use there's just a load of letters on the card, and then you place the spy thing over, and it eliminates all letters apart from the ones that you need to read, like HEIS. So he is in THE, red dragon. So he's telling you another thing, and you've got these dragons here, these 4 dragons which are placed on the paths which move around. You can't pass through them, but the culprit will be in one of those. So when you've worked out all the clues, you think it's in the red dragon, so you go up to the red dragon, you don't have to get the exact number, then you say, I think it's so-and-so. Bit like going to, there was a place, wasn't there, in Cluedo, I think, where you went. Anyway, when you land on all the other squares with the diamonds on, you pick up a fortune cookie card, and it'll give you an instruction. So for instance, there it says, pass it on, give this card to another player who must then miss his or her next turn. Things like that. So yeah, it's a great little game. I'm going to enjoy playing through that. Of course, each mission gives you who the culprit actually is. So when you think you've worked it out and you accuse them, you place the thing over there, and it tells you who the culprit actually is. So number 11, for that example, the culprit is number 11, which is so long. If you're wrong, you're out of the game. So you've got to be careful, make sure you get it right. But there you go. That is Mysteries of OP King. Yeah, thank you very much for watching. Remember, all brushes lead to all, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.